for me as well?
Yep, all set, all set. All right, perfect. Well, thank you for joining us in August for this special panel that we're going to do here today. We've got myself, we've got a whole round robin of people, which we'll do intros in just a second. This month, we're going to be talking about serverless is a mindset. So, what started as a Slack conversation slowly turned into an actual full blown panel where we're going to basically go through some misconceptions about cold starts, Kubernetes, and a lot of other stuff. Obviously, this is Serverless Guru. I'm from Serverless Guru, so I've got a bias towards serverless. We'll hear from everybody else in terms of where they land on the spectrum of how they view all these interesting topics. But before we jump into that, let's go ahead and do an intro. Will, if you want to kick us off, and then we can just go one by one, share about who you are to the audience today.
Okay, let's go. I'm William Peixoto. I'm from Brazil. I'm working from Service Guru from some time, some years ago, like that. And I like to work as a serverless developer, a serverless architect. I've been working from different projects and clients, and I hope you guys can enjoy this session today. All right, can you go, Marcelo?
Yes, thank you, Will. So, hi everyone, I am Marcelo. I'm working for Serverless Guru for almost 2 years now. It's been a nice ride here. So, I'm a cloud engineer. I work a lot with JavaScript, always using serverless frameworks to deploy my stacks and everything. So, I'm very happy to be here and be part of this panel. So, you can go, Marcos.
Thanks, man. So apparently, apart from Ryan, we're all from Brazil here. I'm also from Brazil, from Philonópolis, down south. And I'm the new kid on the block. I just joined Serverless Guru recently, maybe a month ago. And yeah, I started doing serverless when I was working at my previous startup as CTO, and really got hooked into it. So it was a ever since I started like working as a cloud architect, it was a natural way for me to follow and just get deeper into the serverless universe. So yeah, hope you guys enjoy it today.
Awesome, cool. Well, with that, that's the round robin. My name is Ryan Jones. I'm going to be the host today for the panel, as per most months, I guess. And founded Serverless Guru back in 2018. We've grown into this huge international company. As you can see, we have 3 people now from Brazil. I'll actually be down in Brazil side by side with all of these fellow gentlemen here during August 22nd and 23rd at the developer conference for 2022, also called TDC 2022. So if you find yourself, and I'll probably butcher all the Portuguese names, Sao Paulo, Brazil, if you find yourself there, definitely come and stop by our booth. We're going to have coffee, we're going to have stickers. Hopefully we'll have our t-shirts delivered in time. But with that, let's jump into the first topic today. We're going to be talking about cold starts. So what is the reality of cold starts? Is it the boogeyman of the serverless world? Has it been solved already? Is it something to worry about? Let's talk about that. So to kick us off, Marcelo, do you have an opinion on this? What do you think about cold starts in 2022 for serverless?
Yeah, I think it's something that a lot of developers that I know and worked together, they are really they are always mentioning the cold start as a really bad thing that happened using serverless architecture. To be honest with you, like developing APIs and data consumers and everything, I never really felt a real pain, with the cold starts. I mean, when you are using for an API and you have your application for a lot of time, like without being used, sometimes the first user will be impacted. So, but it's not something like different from a network traffic. It's not something that is really will kill the experience of the user or your customer. So I think that the cost versus benefit of you having like your system totally turn it off when nobody's using it versus one user experienced like a little small delay. I think the cost benefit is much better for the Lambda. I mean, I can be I can deal with this low, uh, this loss of experience a bit, but only for one user. I mean, the cost benefit for me is still very green.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess on that same topic, Marcos, well, like, what do you think about cold starts? What do you think about what Marcelo said? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I can comment on that. I totally agree with Marcelo. I'm just gonna bring out a number out here, but maybe 95% of all the use cases we see regularly, they don't really have any troubles with cold starts. For most e-commerces, for most like regular websites, it's going to be just fine. And some people maybe is are a little scared of it, having not tried it yet. But typically, I saw something in an article from AWS itself that said something around the order of like 1% of applications are actually cold started. The rest of them are already warm. And so, if you're not familiar with it, so cold starts only happen when it's been quite some time that the Lambda hasn't been invoked yet, and so the AWS actually has to instance all the environment and fetch all your libraries and everything else to be able to run your code. So if your Lambda is being called continuously or repetitively, most often it's going to just be warm already, so you're not going to experience any cold starts. And even when it does, it usually is in the order of 100 milliseconds to maybe 1 second. So that's why what Marcelo is saying is like it's not going to impact that much. Maybe your loading page, the loading time for your page is usually more than that sometimes. So it's not really that much of a difference, right? So I do understand there are some use cases that perhaps is going to be a problem. I'm guessing, I don't know, maybe in the financial markets or something like that. Maybe I guess Will had some experience with that before. Maybe he can comment on that for us. But sometimes, yeah, 100 milliseconds are seconds on eternity, so you might have to look somewhere else. But for most people, this is not going to be a problem, I'm sure.
Yeah, I agree. I think code started from just some really small use case can be a problem because on the most of all that is not because you if you warm your function you call that once you if for example if you do the login for example you already have your almost your functions deployed and get warm depends of how you deploy your project and for some use case yes for example trading marketing can be a problem but you can have some strategies to avoid that like as the guys already told you about having that lambda warmed or parallel concurrency and all these strategies and also do the small package like using webpack is a best practice have small lambdas always is always a best choice to go with serverless if you were calling about only lambdas but yeah that's my talk about code starting for sure it is not a problem for almost the companies we've been working on a lot of projects using serverless and that is not a problem at all from all these projects and we can deliver a good project even if you can consider it or the code start so yeah I think so.
Yeah, I think all these are great points. What kind of went through my head was like the sort of like how did it start? What are strategies to combat it? Why is it a problem? And I guess like yeah, like those things. And I feel like we kind of did address those, like the how, for instance, we talked about how it actually works, how the cold starts actually operate. Thank you, Marcos, for that. The strategies. We talked about Webpack a little bit. The why it actually happens, a little bit of the breakdown there too. So I guess around cold start. So if we think about where did this come from, and if it is actually solved, why does it keep coming back up? Do y'all have an opinion about that?
From my point of view, at my experience, I mean, I had a company some years ago. I was acting as a CTO, and before I had this experience, I was always thinking as a developer, so performance, how my code would be, and etc. But when you start to be like an entrepreneur, you realize that like, man, you don't have a lot of money, so you need to do like some tough decisions, in my opinion. And in my perspective, I mean, for a user to spend, like Marco said, at the maximum 1 second more to have the experience and then the contact with my system, I can spend like thousands of dollars less, because if nobody's using, my Lambda would be turn it off, and I will have no cost with that. So I had a friend from Florianopolis. He is running a company that has like a chatbot for hotels, and with this pandemic, the point is that like his traffic gets down a lot, so he has no traffic anymore, and he has like zero work to make the application downscale, because he was already using Lambda and serverless for almost everything in his company. So even if you ask for this guy that is like a chat bot and needs like a live response for all the users, I'm 100% sure that he will say no. I prefer to make my user pay this like small issue, because it's really small comparing to other issues that you can have, than like paid just to have my server running with nobody there, just to any user of mine like don't have this 1 second bad experience. So I think the point is that, if you think with a developer head, it can really be a problem, but when you see the big picture, your company and the money and everything that is together, I think it's make totally sense, and the cold start is not even a problem anymore. It's something that you just drop from your head.
Yeah, and I might add to that there's some ways around it, and we'll be sure to actually already mention some of them, but that's like a good tip for you guys who are concerned about it. It's maybe just import whatever you need. So instead of importing the whole AWS SDK, for instance, if you're only going to use DynamoDB, let's say, you can import only the DynamoDB there, and you're going to see some improvements. And we'll also mention a little bit from provisioned concurrency as well. If you're really like, I really need to extract as much performance of this thing as I can, and I'm willing to pay for it. You can actually provision your lambdas to be already warmed up and ready to go into environment. So you're going to pay for that, even though they're not calling. So you lose a little of the benefits of serverless, like Marcelo just mentioned. Whenever his good friend there had little traffic, and everything just went scaled down automatically. So you're going to lose that, but you gain in some performance, right? And so I guess the point here is recurring, right? I don't want to beat around the bush too much. It seems like most use cases is not going to be a problem. There's ways around to minimize it, and if you're really like, I need sub-millisecond responses, then okay, probably then it should look somewhere else. For 99% of the people, this is going to be a non-issue.
Yeah, and about performance perspective is also mentioned. We now have support for Graviton and have a huge performance using serverless. So it's something you should try at least, even before try another things. If you are working as a on a startup, sometimes, as Marcelo said, we never have money. If you are a big company, you should pay less for what you are your infra, and if you need best performance, you should try Graviton, and ARM64 is also a good play, a good try.
Yeah, this is great. And then I kind of thought about the question of like trade-offs, for instance. So we talked about startups, we talked about not having a lot of money, trying to create a business, and so on. So, and there's also like a side too. I think it's some word for like copying somebody's culture. So we read a book about Google, we hear Google's culture, and then we just try to basically lift it and then implement it at our company. And now we have Google's culture is like kind of the thinking, the thought process. But also with like a company like Google or like Netflix that has huge treasure chests of like money, they can hire all the best engineers in the world. They can spend 2 years building out some sophisticated cloud infrastructure that has like the nanosecond response times, right? But for the average person actually building stuff, is is it reasonable to compare like where like would you rather have like 1 second response time once every 10 requests or once every 100 requests, and only spend $30 a month on your entire architecture, or pay somebody $100,000 or something for 6 months plus to basically stand up that equivalent system in a different form. So I guess that sort of thing, that and that's it's a different conversation based on where you're at. If you're a huge company, maybe that's a little bit, maybe you already have that internal expertise. But yeah, I guess, like, what are y'all's thoughts on trade-offs? So, like, is it worth it, I guess, to, where would you stand? Would you rather be, I guess, serverless, or would you rather be, doing something like Kubernetes or virtual machines, or, ECS or containers or something else? What do y'all think?
Okay, I will start. I was waiting if anybody was took the initiative, but here I am. So what I think it's, I mean, I'm a person that I'm always, most of the time, I'm thinking in the small companies, because I mean, in my reality that I live it when I was with my own startup, is that you don't have the like expert developers in the corner, So what I think is, if you want to run with an EC2, I mean, you need to know about network, VPC, a little bit of scale, So if you are going to run in a elastic beanstalk, you will need to learn a bit about load balancers. So all these things makes it's difficult to have the real product and the real business running through the customers, and I think it's like a really heavy bag for a junior developer, like the person just came outside the university, and they start the first job and needs to take care about this difficult stuff, So what I feel like with serverless, is that you are like always almost focusing in the business rules, and it's, I mean, when you're thinking serverless, it's impossible to not thinking Lambda. It's the first thing that you think, like Lambdas. Serverless is Lambdas, but this is not true. Serverless is not Lambdas. I mean, when you want like an HTTP endpoint with this Lambda, now okay, you have the functions URL now with Lambdas, but most of the applications are using API gateway. So it's an API gateway. It's difficult to have like a API gateway running using EC2, even Kubernetes. It's something not easy to have like working. And with serverless, with AWS mostly, you are just connecting a piece of code in another product that is the API gateway. And also you can connect to SQL, SNS, like you will use like a set of products that make your life easier, So in my understanding, the here in Brazil we have like a term that is the jump of the cat, like the jump of the cat is that AWS mostly solves the almost all the problems that you can have with a tech as a technology company, So the point is, the difference between the technology companies are their business, are the business rules at the end. But most of the products and the projects are almost the same, So I worked for a lot of companies, and this is what I see, I mean, a lot of companies using different like open source products or even paid products, but at the end it was the same. It was like an API that is doing requests for a server and needs to get data from the database and gives a response to the user. So I think when you get that AWS is like generically solving the technology problem is that you can have for you, you realize that you don't need like a huge team to solve the problems, So you can pay less at the cloud, and you can pay less for the team, and you can be faster, So for me, this is a real good scenario. And also, I mean, working for Serverless Guru and the customers that we have here, like big customers, you can see that it scales from the startup to the enterprise company, you know. So this is was something that really shaked my head when I really see that, because when I was small, I thought, oh man, this product, it can scales, you know. If I get bigger, it will scales, but I never see that for real, you know. But when I joined Serverless Guru and started to work for bigger customers projects, I realized that, you know, you feel that you are still working for a small company, you know, because you are solving the problems like simple, you know, in a simple form. But it's an enterprise company. It has the bureaucracy and the rules and everything. And I mean, I'm in love with serverless for 7 years now, you know. So if you don't stop me, I will keep talking and talking.
Yeah, man. I think this thing that you mentioned here, like even though it's an enterprise company, is still everything's so simple. It's mainly as well because of the microservices architectures, right? And serverless way goes hand in hand with microservices as well. So even in scale, what I'm trying to say, even in scale, it actually kind of makes things easier for all the developers, and which in turn makes things easier for the whole company, right? So it's cheaper to develop, cheaper to maintain. And so I totally second that. Would like to add for what Marcelo said, that when we are small, especially for small companies, startups, I believe it's really the way to go. I really try to convince other people to do this, even though it might seem daunting at first. You might look at AWS's list of services and think, "Oh man, I don't know like any of them, and there are hundreds. Where should I start?" You can just start small and go with Lambdas, go with DynamoDB, perhaps S3s, and so it's not too much to learn. Maybe a weekend you can get the hang of it in doing like a simple project. And this is actually what I did when I first joined my previous company, where I was CTO and I was the sole developer for quite some time. I really felt the need to scale myself, if that makes any sense. Like, man, I really, this is all I got, right? We're small, we don't have any money, we have to get this thing to work. And I really have to make sure every time, every hour I'm spending here is driving us forward towards bringing the customer, the proposed customer some value, right? And so I don't want to be spending time like managing EC2 instances and updating my Nginx, you know. And AWS, or should I say Amazon, actually they have a name for it. They call it undifferentiated heavy loading. And it's, I think it's just perfect to describe it, right? So it's things that they are hard, they take some time, and they actually usually take a lot of expertise to understand and to do it right. But they don't actually provide any value to customers. They don't help it at all in differentiating yourself from your competition, right? So if as much as you can, in my view, as a small company, a startup, as much as you can avoid that and just third party that to any cloud provider, AWS in our case, the better off you are, right? And so I think this is most of the way. And actually, one of the trade-offs you get is kind of another thing that the boogeyman that people are always afraid of, that is vendor lock-in. We might just get into that sometime in the future here in this call. But for me, it's just a good trade-off to do, right? So I can developer cheaper and faster, and if that means I might be locked in per se for into a particular vendor for quite some time, that's fine by me, because this is the way I can most rapidly bring value to the customer, right?
Yeah, this is great. I think it's a good segue into our second topic for today, which is basically getting into multi-cloud. Is multi-cloud a thing? Should we worry about multi-cloud? Should we be building multi-cloud? Should we be doubling down into a single cloud? I guess if I read here what it actually says, says don't fall into the trap of potential savings you might have one day and neglect the
Yeah.
cost overhead you pay every month in both actual cloud expenses and a bloated technical team. So with that being said, what are y'all thoughts on multi-cloud? It gets talked about all the time. It's in almost every slide deck that you see coming out of the container space and the virtual machine space. And is it a carryover of like trying to make that still make sense today? Is it the boogeyman? Is it just meant to basically scare people? What do y'all think?
Well, I can hop in since I was since I did the segue. I can add a few cents here. I believe again for small companies is you shouldn't be worried about that. Maybe in some cases, especially for compliance reasons, you might be required to have some of those like multi cloud or multi failure field traps, right? And so it might be possible for a big company, maybe financial something, to have the necessity for that. But it's usually not really the case for most companies. And what I usually see, and I have this conversation a lot of times already, it's sometimes executives they're like, oh, I don't want to be locked in into this vendor. Sometime in the future they might increase the prices, and so I'm just going to build all my infrastructure using Kubernetes and containers and whatnot to be able to eventually just lift everything up and move providers if I eventually want to, right? And that they most likely will never come, or have most of the cases that I've seen that they never came. But what actually happens, and where I mentioned this briefly, is you actually end up paying a lot more for their whole infrastructure, for the teams ends up getting bloated, and it's more expertise you have in your team for DevOps and everything else. And so the potential cost savings you might have in the future by moving cloud providers is usually something that it's going to be overridden or just made unprofitable by the actual expenses you have on a monthly basis because you decided to have this multi-cloud able infrastructure, right? And so I think usually this is a trap for most people. You would most often just be better off opting to one of the providers, AWS, GCP, Azure, whatever fits your needs, and just sticking to it for as long as you can. And if eventually this day comes in the future, you might have to figure out how to do it. But I believe you should try to stick with a single one, not go to the multi-cloud trap per se.
Yeah, just to open it up to Marcelo and Will, is this a champagne problem? Like, I think Christy Peralt from Liberty Mutual, I think she said a yacht problem or something. I believe she was the one that was saying it, but it's basically, is this a problem that once you have it, it's actually a good thing, I guess. Like, obviously compliance wise, I can't do anything about that. But sometimes people are over optimizing early on, right? I think the thing there is that pre-optimization is the root of all evil. And so if we started thinking if we were a startup and we started thinking about our multi-cloud strategy, that's probably like, that might be crazy unless we're working with like the government or something. So I guess like in that case, like, is this overblown in terms of how people are like trying to implement it and like think about it, or what are y'all's thoughts on the idea of multi-cloud? Yeah.
Yeah, I think when you talk about multi-cloud, it's not just serverless. Is any you can choose any strategy to you need to think. Like for example, if you really need a multi-cloud, I think no, because you can have multiple regions deployed. You can deal with the air perspective, like using different regions to deploy your infrastructure. You also need to take care and think how much that does it cost to move your data from, for example, one cloud to another, because you have the data out costs, because moving database is not is not easy and really expensive if you think about it. Like so, it's not common you create something from the beginning thinking about multi-cloud, because you have different strategies to deal with with this outage from I don't know, from one region, and not even from AWS, but for each cloud has a multi-region. So I think it's cheaper for you choose, for example, a small approach, like a simple approach, and you start thinking small, and then when your company grows, you should then try to do a multi-cloud, because each cloud has different services, and when you build your architecture, you know which cloud you're going to work, so you know what service you can use or what strategy you're going to use. If you are on build everything using EC2, I think you are losing a lot of time and money because we have a lot of service to use, and maybe on different clouds this service is not available. So this is kind of things you should consider when you are talking about multi-cloud, not just about hey, okay, I'm going to move use my computer. I going to use Kubernetes. Yes, your computer you can move to a Kubernetes cluster, but and another things, like for example, the learning curve for your team, like you should they know how to use Google Cloud, they know how to use Azure, they know the different services. You have support for these services as well, so you're going to pay a lot for support as well. So that's depends of use case, but yeah, I think you can have different approach than moving to multi-cloud. Before thinking moving to multi-cloud, you should try at least maybe, oh okay, but my cloud provider can support a DR. What is the proposed from my cloud provider to DR, or have a multi-region deployment? So I think this thing is you should try before thinking about multi-cloud. That is my point of view. And what do you think about it, Marcel?
Yeah, I always imagine like the situations, So in my mind, I'm here like imagining like a salesperson from a cloud provider is speaking with a CEO and saying to him and convincing why it should be nice to be multi-cloud and everything. But at no point this salesperson will know like the time needed to do that work, So for the CEO, imagining that, I think you can say, oh, okay, I will have like $100,000 of credit in the new cloud provider for 1 year. It would be nice, but the migration will take 1 year. So when the migration finished, your credit will be gone, and you will be paying again for the cloud provider, and you lose like 1 year of money of time that you could invest for more features, and also solving problems of the actual platform and everything. And also, I lived a similar situation working for a big company that migrate from one cloud provider to another. And in the meantime, they thought, okay, so let's be multi-cloud. As we are going to migrate, we can go to any cloud that we need. And this is what you said, Will. The services, they are not like totally equal, So okay, if you are running a Kubernetes cluster and you already have the size to pay for this team, a really specialized team that has like very specific skills. Okay, it's a good problem, as Ryan said, right? So you are already earning a lot and you want to expand, and makes sense, But sometimes I really feel that the CEOs getting this trap of this credit, I'm going to have this credit, but they don't really knows the effort that needs to be put in the migration, And sometimes you start to have problems that you didn't had before. So you need to deal with customer churns, because your system starts to fail, or the sprints will need to have more time for bugs because you will have like migration problems, So it's a lot of things. Time is money, right? So you are losing time, you are losing money, you are losing your customers. So I mean, you could be running like multi-region, and you would be sometimes be more safer than you were like being running multi-cloud. I mean, so it's something that in my head, it's customer first, So what's better for my customer, it's better for me, and it's better for my company, So if AWS is the one solving all my problems, why not using them, Even using the simple services, it's even better, because you don't need to hire like more expertise and more people to deal with problems that you should not have, So I have a really strong position with that. I mean, as Ryan said, if you already reached this size of company that this is a real good step, or if you're working for the government, as we said, it makes sense. But if you're a company that is growing, you will have like much other problems, that you need to deal before you even think in a migration to multi-cloud. This is my opinion.
Yeah, and I wanted to share as well because y'all shared your experience as well, like in the multi-cloud spectrum. I back in 2018, I want to say I was helping a company set up a hybrid sort of solution. It was serverless as well. It was a very weird setup. It was basically, I believe it was Angular. We were using Amplify, like the Amplify Angular library, just to connect into Cognito and other stuff like that. We were running Lambda functions. We had AppSync. Was this 2018? Yeah, I think AppSync was still around. I think it came out in late 2017. Maybe I'm like a year off. Regardless, AppSync, Amplify, Angular, everything was written with serverless framework as well. And we hit issues because what they were trying to do is map everything over to Google Cloud at like the same time, and then run like almost like half and half. And so it like at the time, Google Cloud was so not advanced in terms of how they handle infrastructure as code and reusability of stuff, and the experience that we get on AWS with like Lambda and all the connections that you get, and it being like glue code for like the entire cloud, being able to have these like templates that you can then just rerun and so on. Definitely at that time, Google's way far behind. I couldn't Google Cloud Functions, all that stuff was like, not great. The whole experience was like very messy, and they tried to go that route. It was very complicated. The users, and this is like going back to what Marcelo was saying, users don't care. They don't care if you're running Kubernetes. They don't care if you're running serverless. They don't care if you're running a virtual machine. They don't care if it's Cobalt. The only thing they care about is it fast and does it work when I need it to work? Can I rely on it when I click on stuff? Like, is that working? And if it is, great. The rest of it doesn't matter at all, right? And so I do feel like sometimes in the industry, and to wrap that up, that actual thing, they've since completely peeled that back, and now they are in 100% AWS, and they're no longer relying on Google Cloud for any part of that infrastructure. And I understand where people use like a 95% cloud, like one cloud provider, and then maybe like Google BigQuery or something like that from a different cloud provider is actually a really good service, and so you just plug into that one service. But definitely not deploying entire mirror stacks and so on. But I do feel like in the industry, there is something where when someone talks about something, everybody else is like, oh, I gotta do that too. And so, we've seen it with the machine learning, we've seen it with crypto, we've seen it with Web3, it's like, and I feel like maybe some of the time, like serverless also gets sort of that rep of like, is serverless just the next thing? Like, is it just a Web3 or something like that? And even if Web3 has value, I think the overall look of it is like, oh, here's another thing, right? And in terms of multi-cloud, I feel like people that are talking about multi-cloud are not probably doing the day-to-day side of stuff. And it's more of either trying to sell a product, right? Telling you, hey, here's a boogeyman. This is a solution to it. Or it's basically this, maybe trying to like check a box if there's not a compliance side to it. Like otherwise, one thing I wanted to bring up is like, how likely is it for two AWS regions to go down at the same time? I tried to actually look this up and prep for this, and I couldn't even find a number on it. I don't know if it's ever happened where US East 1 and US West 2 and like Oregon, let's say Oregon and the East Coast, West Coast and East Coast both went down at the exact same time. And so to build something that is able to run in two regions in a serverless setup, it's fairly simple. You just have a dynamic variable for your region. You deploy multiple stacks. You have some sort of routing based on that at the highest level, and then you can basically route to the two different stacks based on if traffic is failing or not. If that never goes down, and there's no history of that ever going down, the idea of the multi-cloud thing to me is kind of I don't know, it's more like marketing jargon, I guess, would be my opinion. So
Yeah.
feel free to jump in there.
If I can complement a bit, like what you were saying, I think what I already heard as well is, okay, but if AWS raises the price, man, let's be honest. if it raises the price, Google, Azure, everybody will raise the price, because they are competitors, right? So it's something that is not for me. It's not a real deal, So if computing gets high, the price, it will get high for everybody, So I mean, not even this is a strong opinion in my mind, I mean, if you rely and you have the confidence in your cloud provider, and they have like regions running across the world, why not, right? Using those regions instead of a multi-cloud. So for me, I agree with you, Ryan.
Yeah, for sure. I think Marcelo is say and Raya say like everything like wow, what is the chance the AWS like get, raise the price? I think historically they going to reduce the price like they always trying to create new services to reduce price for us to as a customer to create and best solutions and spend less. Sometimes it looks like hey we are spend a lot, but how much costs your team to train your team in a different cloud? How much does that going to cost for you for your company to have specialized from AWS, specialized from Azure, and specialized from Google Cloud? So I think the cost on the end will be really high, and that is my point of view about, because it is it's not just choose a cloud, go there and start using. It's not like that. We are talking about business. We are talking about money and serious here. So you should have a specialist on your team. You should have someone who knows what is they are doing. So this professional, is expensive. Is not like you're going to choose a junior and give all your products on her hands. It's very hard you find some company like that. So yeah, it's my point of view as well. Like when you go to spend your money, you choose uh, should choose well, and you know I think is that.
Yeah, I actually wanted to comment on that. When I was starting here at my startup, I didn't had any like much experience with any of them. I had dabbled into GCP and AWS, but at the time I kind of looked around and saw in AWS was really by far the best one here, right? And most complete and robust. And so I just went that route. And one thing that it really caught my eye is at the time I read somewhere that AWS had actually reduced their prices multiple times in the years since their launch. And I think in this year it's over 100 times they have in 107, something like that. By this year, they have reduced their prices instead of increasing it. And as we can see, every time they launch a new architecture and every time and now they're doing Lambda tiered pricings as well. So if you're running into like large applications and running billions of lambdas, you're going to get some discounts on that as well. And so historically, the trend is to have a better and better deal for your customers, right? For AWS customers, which is us. And so I haven't had any troubles with that so far. And for since like I said, I wasn't really an expert in cloud, but the learning curve was really uh, it was okay, right? You get started into the most common one, like I mentioned before, like lambdas and s3s and whatnot, and soon you realize you know a lot of stuff from SNS, SQS, and you're running kinesis, and you understand about firehose, and you're I don't know, you start to dabble with Athena, and soon and you realize you're like a kind of a serverless expert as well, right? So you go into, oh, I need to solve this little problem. What is there to help me solve it? And then you learn about the service. And so the knowledge is really compartmentalized, which it really improves with your learning curve, right? And so again, it's a great experience for anyone who's trying to get into like cloud development and all, like to run your company, something like that, and just have to pick the one cloud that you think it's going to solve your needs. So if you're really big into big data and something like machine learning and stuff, maybe GCP is going to be for you. So if you're running like a regular e-commerce or something like that, or you really want to integrate lots of services, and that's what I chose in the area, in the sorry in the at the time. AWS, my feel was like they have everything. They're like not the best, particularly in some cases, but they most likely have everything I need and might need in the future, right? So I chose that one, and I think that's a good way to enter this cloud development world, right?
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I love that. And I also the tiered pricing that you brought up is really important because, again, that's also something that people think about with serverless it's like at first it was like, yeah, go serverless, it's gonna save money, all this stuff. And then, and then it was like, hey, look at these bills. If I just had one virtual machine running, I would be like paying this much. And instead I've got this huge bill because of the CloudWatch bill and all this other stuff. And so the question that was brought up, or a thing that was said by Jeremy Daly at the it's not serverless conference, serverless days, New York. He was talking about Lambda tiered pricing and the idea that they should do that. Um, I guess like Magic Ball, they actually did end up doing that a few weeks later or something, which is funny. So I don't know, like he said it out loud, not me. So AWS, grill him, not me. Basically that whole tiered pricing thing though is really important because it was pretty obvious. Like everybody's already running it. It costs money. They already have a profit margin that's probably pretty sizable on top of every Lambda invocation. If they just reduce that slightly, they continue to be competitive and they continue to give something back to the people, the customers that are already using it. And we've seen, as Marcus said, historically, they've done that. The 107 number, I think, was from like EC2 alone. So from 2006, I guess, to now, 107 times they've reduced the price of EC2. So thinking that AWS might at some point increase prices, there's there's not any evidence of that. There is evidence that when they create a new service, it is crazy overpriced. I've definitely seen that where it's like I think they came out with one where it analyzed your code and it was like insanely expensive. And so that definitely happens, but gradually over time, typically as the thing matures and more people adopt it, they do drop price down gradually. So seeing that happen with Lambda, I think is a positive signal that other areas will get addressed as well, such as like CloudWatch metrics and how expensive that can get, and logging and log storage and so on. Or at least those ones, those would be like the best one for them to probably address for a serverless architecture. Okay, well, with that, we are to our third topic, and we've sort of already touched on it quite a bit when we were going through the other two topics, but is serverless right for my young company? And since we already talked about young company, let's open up all three. So we've got young company, we've got a mid-sized company, and we've got a large company. And so with that in mind, whoever wants to kick it off, what do you think about this whole idea? Is serverless right for each one of those, only for certain ones? And what type of makeup does that existing company need to then make serverless the right choice? And what are your thoughts?
Okay, so I'm going to take it. So my answer is definitely a big yes. If you are a young company, I mean, I have a rule in my head. So if you are a young company, you should be started with serverless. If you are like a medium company, you should be using it. I mean, for half of of your application at the minimum. And if you're an enterprise, you should be migrating your first microservice to serverless. Because it's something that when you start, you don't stop anymore. It's like it's the topic of our life, right? It's a mindset. So when you start to think of like you start to realize that Lambda is like a glue, to just connect other services, and build your pipeline or whatever you want with that. So I think when you are a young company, you discover the Lambda, and you start to run an API and do like small things that you do as a young company, right? And as you start to get bigger, you realize that you need to scale, and you will scale automatically because you started with serverless at the beginning, So it's something that is, it makes a click in your head, and you realize that, oh my god, I should be doing like everything with that, and you start to change like all the services that you have that is using EC2, sometimes AKS or whatever. You start to see, oh, okay, I can use a Lambda, I can put a step function here, or I can put an SQS to have that like a auto retry for my messages that have errors. You start, it's a win-win. You start to win time, you start to win performance, your customers start to win a better experience. So and sometimes I feel like the serverless mindset helps you to solve the problems much easier than if you were like in a simple environment like a virtual machine. I mean, if you need to do a retry and you are using a single node for a node application in a virtual machine, your retry is code based. So you can have a lot of problems with this one retry. But if you are using like SQS with a Lambda, if it fails, it will put up again to the QE and will try to process again. So you don't have problems that you would have if you go in the simple way that at the end is not the simple. So it's this fear of start with something new, something that you don't really know about it. It's crazy, to start with something new. And a fun fact, when I started with serverless, I was not working for Serverless Guru, but I was like every day in the Serverless Guru blog. I mean, I found like everything I needed as a young company to have my business running. And I was sharing that with my friends. So, oh, I need something. Okay, I have the URL. It was always Serverless Guru blog. So you have a lot of content from
Yeah, me too,
AWS.
man.
Yeah, I mean, AWS documentations are not knowing to be like the best documentations. It's something that is a bit, you struggle a bit with that, until you start to work like for some years and you understand how they think and how the docs are like plugged together. But sometimes a Medium post or a blog post or a Stack Overflow thread, helps you to get where you want faster. And this is what in my head when I made this click, when I understand that the Lambda is a glue and I have like a lot of other services, you realize that your price it starts to decrease, because you are using the right things for the right things. It's easy as that. So if you try to do a QE using a single Lambda, you will fail, and you will pay more than using SQS, and you will have like a lot of engines that make it safer for you. So it's it's what I said in the beginning. If you're a young company, you should be using that. If you're a medium, you should start to, and if you're enterprise, neither. Also, you should be starting to use and migrate some services, and it will like spread this mindset around your team. Because when one of the team starts to understand and starts to explain to others, the thing starts to like increase like naturally. Like everybody like align the mindset, and it's awesome. It's awesome. I love it.
Yeah, man, great points you put there. Yeah, I would also like to add to that what Marcelo mentioned, like this mindset, this sharing, right? It kind of it encourages a lot of stuff in exploration as well, and so it kind of brings up some space for innovation, especially in big companies. Like imagine yourself, you have like an enterprise company, a really big one, and you have everything there. It's just a huge monolith, and everything's running together, and your payments and your user access and like all your logic and your databases. And so if you want to try something new and like maybe we should do authentication this way or something else, right? It's really usually really cumbersome to get around like all the integrations and everything else, and so it often gets postponed or denied, like, and so it really it gets in the way of trying some stuff and really improving. And what often ends up happening is some companies end up staying behind, right? So this is why some small startups can move 10x faster than some big enterprises, right? Because they have a smaller team, everything are faster, and a big piece of that is there's not just as much lines of code since they're in an enterprise, right? So if in a way you can compartmentalize that, it goes a long way into improving innovation. And I would also like to add as well a topic that we haven't discussed here yet, but security is a good one as well. When you're at least when you're doing things right in serverless way, you can actually really provision, really give only the permissions that that specific lambda, that specific service needs. For instance, if something is only going to read from a database, it doesn't need any write access, right? And so you can really compartmentalize again, and it really makes it much more harder to compromise an infrastructure. In the case of was like an EC2 or some just a big monolith, once you get access to it, you get access to everything, right? And here in serverless way, no, you have kind of have to weave your way through all the services, and you kind of have to beat AWS, which is like a huge company. You're having the best guys in security in the world working for you, right? You just have to parameterize it correctly. And so this innovation and security is an aspect that often gets overlooked as well, but I think they're hugely important, and I think it's a good thing to keep in mind when we're talking about serverless as well. And so, to kind of go back just a little and answer Ryan's question there for small, medium, and large companies, I think small we've covered at length already, right? So it's a development speed and just getting focused in business value. And for medium companies, I think is where we see most of like the cost performances. Assuming this is a medium company that wasn't serverless and is now starting to migrate, it's probably going to see some cost improvements as well as some leeway into innovation. And for large companies, enterprise companies, we can definitely see some improvements in security and innovation as well.
If I can get the hook, I mean,
Yeah.
something to be realistic. I don't know if it happens with you already, guys, but it's not like a dream every day, you know. Some days you have nightmares, you know, because we are speaking good, you know, like everything is a sunshine, you know, and it's not,
Yeah.
this is not the real deal, you know. For example, I had an experience, I love step functions, you know, it's something that for me is a game changer. I love it. And when I started to use that, I had a flow that I have a single lambda that was being executed inside the step function. So I migrate from my EC2 monolith to lambdas, and I was like excited. And the first night, my bill was like 10 times bigger than it was before. I almost started to cry, you know, because I was on my mind. It's not possible, you know. It's impossible because I did the calculations, you know, in the paper. It should be like a cheaper bill, you know. So instead of believe that I did it right and forget about it and get back to my VM, I started to investigate what was wrong, you know? And it was this single lambda that when I moved it to outside the step function as a next step in my flow, my build decreased from the beginning like 100 times, you know? It was a simple lambda in a bad place, you know? So it's something that, I mean, it was I can remember the feeling, you know, of the frustration that I felt in that day, you know. But I said, no, it's impossible. It should be cheaper, you know. And I started to investigate, dig it out, and the point is that when you actually learn the thing, like you deal with the failure in your for real, you know, when you learn it, I mean, you never fail anymore with this point, you know. So it's something that it's a mindset because of that, you know. You are going to fail. I'm 100% sure that in the first time you are going to fail, you know. But you need to keep going because when you get the track, when you really understand how the thing work, you never go back, you know. You never go back.
Yeah, you remind me of one of the first things I did. I actually just put a lambda in front of an RDS database instance, and I just instantly was getting throttled. You know, so there's definitely some pitfalls. There are some things you might have to learn along the way, But that's why we're here, right, guys? So you can check in serverless Go blogs, and you can check all of our documentation as well. We have a GitHub with some templates as well to get you guys started. So it's there's lots of documentation, lots of information out there in the web. So you can definitely just look around and get someone to kind of help you through these first steps, right? To make sure you don't repeat the same errors as we did. So now you're probably not going to do either of these things now that we talked about it, right? But yeah, that's it. You guys have lots of ways to learn how to implement it the right way at the first time.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely love this. And I think I think it was touched on by Marcelo pretty in depth. Thank you for motivating every person in the audience and people watching later on. They're probably like, yeah, okay, it's time to go serverless, got to do this now. And Marcos, you touched on this too. I definitely want to open up to Will. So what do you think? Serverless mindset. That's the name of our panel, serverless mindset. Have you seen anything like with yourself or with teams that have adopted serverless? How do they start to change their behavior? Well, what happens, I guess, when you start to adopt serverless?
Yeah, I from my experience, when we're going to start using serverless is kind of a new word, and is always a challenge. And if you think about infrastructure perspective, and you start to talk about with some sysadmin, and you should, and you're going to present some project today, they start making questions like that. Oh, but if my computer fails, how can I go there and check what's happened? It's that's why I think I have disagreement as well. Is mindset is not just use serverless, use Lambda. You should understand what and how serverless works. On that point, yeah, I mean Lambda, and how to deal with that. Like you not never you never need to go to the machine and check what's wrong, like, because it's a service. Behind the scenes, yes, we have a machines, yeah. But you don't take care about it. The thing is, you can just deploy your code as a and you start using. So from some people, it's hard to understand this changing of mindset, because on the end, what is on the end, we can start at least from my side, how I learn services serverless is more or less on event driven, always as event driven. So what start my function is an event. What I'm going to trigger is an event. So you always have an event to begin and into the end. To the end. So you have an event from API gateway, you have an event from SQS, you have an event from DynamoDB streams, you have an event from anything. So you start to deal with events, then start to think about different perspectives. So events, I think, is something you should put on your team to start learning if you don't know. And I think the first step to start using serverless. And when you start to understand events, you can, and then you can look for serverless and say, oh, is just an event. I just should need to read a function. I need to, for example, you don't need to create I don't know, a microservice, a different deployment, put on a Kubernetes, and keep pulling the queue every time or every second. You can just have a lambda functions, and when you have a new message on the queue, the lambda will be triggered. So you just pay when that is used. So is difficult for some people to understand, and to figure out on looking for this perspective, because they think, oh, but if I have some I need to do, for example, a cron job. Nowadays you have CloudWatch to do cron jobs, and and I think it was movies for even for different services. But and when you start to learn serverless, at least from my side, the difficult was to explain to different people, like, oh, you can just deploy it, and that's it, your code is running. You don't need to they care about like how create a new virtual machine, because big companies and medium companies usually you have a process to deploy new projects, not just go there and deploy a project. You need to create a gmood, you have steps to follow, and one of the steps is create a provision your infrastructure you need. So using serverless, you already code your infra, so you are right there. And for from some companies, it's hard to understand this, and from people's, on the end. So I think is this change of mindset is the key to use serverless, and when you change your mindset and you look for AWS services, you just see a puzzle, and you start to use, oh, I can connect these services with another one, I can connect this service with that, then I can have an asynchronous execution. Oh, but and to orchestrate my service, I need to do everything on my code? No, you don't need, as Marcelo said, now I have step functions. Step functions can do that for you. So we are all developers on the end, and we all make mistakes, and writing less code, you're going to have less mistakes. So that is the truth. So all the time look for if you can write less code, you're going to have less mistakes and less problems. I think that is my point of view as well. And don't create don't create the new services. You can just use what someone else already created. So that is the key. And follow your blogs. You have a lot of experience in the and to share.
Sometimes I heard from a big friend called Ryan Jones that the best code is the one that you don't write, and this is the right mindset. If you don't need it, don't write
Yeah,
it because somebody is already solving that for you.
wise words indeed.
Yeah, I definitely don't quote me on that because I probably heard it from someone else and then just repackaged it. But yeah, I think it's definitely like it definitely changes the way that you look at stuff, and it's like it opens up a lot of possibilities too. Because once you get through that initial like, oh my gosh, overwhelmed feeling of like there's thousands of services, this is like so complicated, so complex. What we were doing before, I understand all that. We built and we ran our we built our own email system, our own queue system, and we know what that is, and so on. But then when you start to go, hey, let me think outside just myself. Yes, I have that domain knowledge. I know where all the bodies are. But what about the new people that come in? And it's like, oh, well, technically, if they come in, then they'll have to just go through the process. Is there documentation for all the existing systems? Not really. It'll just have to be if I talk to them, then they'll understand what it is. I think it's a very liberating thing, especially for new people coming into the industry, because once you get past that initial overwhelm feeling and you actually start being able to build REST APIs or GraphQL APIs or build some image, transform pipeline thing, you then start looking at all those services and you go, oh, I could launch my own 5G network. I could I could have a satellite in space. You know what I mean? And you start thinking about like, wow, this is like a really interesting thing that I now have access to, which I would have never had access to previous. I can make a robot talk to me. I can build robots. I can build machine learning stuff. I could switch from being a front-end developer to a machine learning developer just by clicking a couple buttons and then trying to go down that pathway. And that's a very interesting change, because I think for the first time ever, probably as a developer, we have access to that much power to go in any direction that we want and create insane world-class systems, because thousands of engineers at Amazon spent tens of thousands of hours plus and huge amounts of customer feedback to then harden these services around specific use cases like queuing or image storage or just storage in general, or compute, and being able to do that and then take away all the abstraction layers underneath, right? So like when we thought about data centers, it was really hard to create an online business when you had to spin up a data center, right? Not spin up, you literally had to find a building, get it climate controlled, set up racks of servers. That was a very huge level of cost, and it was very limiting for people to get started, especially startups. And then you had people that were, oh, you can rent one of our racks of servers inside of this data center, and you just gotta like, if it maintenance and all that stuff, and how do we fail over and all those things? Okay, we'll just buy another server and kind of connect them, I guess. And like super complicated, huge barrier of entry. And then we went to containers or virtual machines actually. hosted by something like EC2 on AWS or a different cloud provider. And you could spin one of those up very easily. And then you could go in there, do your stuff, install the dependency you need, drop your files in there, start up a server. But then scaling wise is a little bit more tricky. So then we went to containers. And then now we're at this point of serverless, which is just the latest abstraction layer above all the rest of that stuff. Whereas a developer, we just look at our code. So, if it's basically, we look at our code and then we look at how it plugs into all these different services. And if we can do that properly, we can build really amazing stuff. And it's a great opportunity. If you're listening to this and you're watching it and you're hearing all of us talk and you're like, I think serverless is kind of interesting, do a proof of concept. Take a very small project. Maybe even like I say like this, if you have 100 different paths on your API, take one of those paths and try to move it to serverless, make it serverless, copy your code over into a Lambda, hell, connect it all inside the console, right? We don't have to get super complicated. You don't have to start with infrastructure as code and have a crazy deployment process and all that. Drag and drop it, connect the things together, and then create a routing system, a route that like if it calls /feed, it goes to the serverless one. If it calls /accounts, it goes to the existing. Try that out. Make that your small win. And then if it's interesting to the rest of your team, continue to develop it outward. And if you're listening and you're getting started, my personal opinion, how I started with serverless was building an Alexa skill. Super easy. I didn't do infrastructure as code at that point. I didn't have like some crazy DynamoDB setup, but I was able to get a physical object in my real world to then tell me when a train would arrive in Portland, Oregon. And that was super cool, especially when I showed it to an entire class of people. And there was like, I think like 30 plus people around, and everybody was just like, whoa, like that's so crazy. You made this thing talk. And it was probably, maybe like 500 lines of code. So yeah.
I was like listening for what you were saying, and in my head is like a phrase like repeating, like, man, serverless is a world for humbles. You need it's an exercise of being humble. I mean, you need to trust that another developer and another team like solved a huge piece of your problem much better than you. I mean, you don't need even to think about the problem because a team, like an expertise team, solved that for you. So when you detach, it's like it's almost egoless. It's the point is that, I mean, you need to be humble with yourself and realize that others can do the work better of you, but not relying in your business rules. The business rules, it's your rules. This is what you really need to do and really need to invest your time. Because for these generic things like APIs, authentication, QA systems, like anything you want, we had like a team that had the investment of billions of thousands of dollars. I have no idea the size of the investment. And something that I like love it to know when I see is that the AWS is like uh, um, it was like the CTO think that in the university, right? So it's his PhD theory. I don't know how it says in English. So it's something that, I mean, Google Cloud, Azure, they come later. So the guy that thought about it and make it work and connected the dots, it was his like PhD. So it's something that it has the right investments with the right specialists. They really solved that like generically for the whole world. So you just need to be humble and think, okay, I have a problem. Does anybody already solve that? Do a Google search. And we are with 7 billions of people in Earth, right? So it's almost impossible to you to having a problem that it's the first time that Earth like had this problem. So this is what changed in my mind. And one simple sample that I had with that is I have a friend that he is a data scientist. So he likes to code in Python and do some local functions to run some algorithms. So at the time the guy speak with me and said, oh, I have this algorithm, this is amazing. And I said, okay, so why you don't run it in the cloud? And he said, but I don't know how that work. I need to put an EC2, I will need to run a Python environment, connect the database and everything. And said, okay, it's a function that you have, right? It has an input and an output, right? And he said, yes. And I said, okay, so it's the perfect scenario for a Lambda. A Lambda is a function. It has an input and an output. So he started with serverless framework, and in like 1 or 2 days, he already had his whole stack and algorithm running in the cloud. And it unblocks his head. I mean, he just realized that he was trying to solve problems that was already being solved by the others. And this is the thing that makes you move forward. I mean, the whole world is changing, the economy is changing, we are being like a more community beings. And serverless for me, of course with technology, but it's the perfect sample of that. You have like a big community. This community is building a lot of generic stuffs, and they are like putting their patterns in the GitHub or Bitbucket or whatever you want. If you want to spin up an RDS today with a VPC, you need like 5 minutes of Google plus 2 minutes of serverless deploy, and you had it. So being humble, a lot of people is working with that. I mean, this is the right path in my mind. So this is, for me, it was like the beginning of the changing of my mindset. And this is it. At the end is our community, and we need to share, and it's the best because everybody grows together.
Yeah, no need to reinvent the wheel, right, Marcelo?
Correct. Why reinventing, right? The wheel is
Yeah.
already well established.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely agree. And I know respectful to people that are watching. I know we're 15 minutes over, so thank you for staying with us. I know this is I think overall where this has been the biggest hype session the last 15 minutes. So definitely walk away feeling good. We have one question here I want to flag, and then we'll kind of get to a close here. Hi guys, should I worry about security when migrating to a serverless architecture? What do y'all think? Who wants to take it? Will, do you have a opinion?
Yeah, always security is always the something you need to look for. And when you go serverless, you should just follow the best practice. As for example, if you are using API, you don't need to expose this to entire world, right? If you can create private endpoints, if that is private for just for your company, or if it is open to world, you can use different approach like API keys. You can use Cognito to authenticate your users, and and less privilege as well. Always when you are coding your Lambda, and I don't know if everyone knows, but a lot of people say about DynamoDB and all this stuff, but using DynamoDB, you can have really tiny, really you can control access to on the table level. You can show just some properties and for some users, and you can control even the properties from different users. So yes, definitely something you should to take care, and is always good to take a look on the AWS documentation and follow the best practice. Always, you don't want to spend a lot of money, and you don't want to someone else can access your system and have all your information. So it is always good to use follow the best practice, and because on the end we are using the same practice as any system. You need WAF, you need DDoS protect, you need a lot of things. So it's the same. Only different is your system. You don't need to take care about infra perspective. So nobody going to access your infrastructure, yes, but you can have hackers attacks from your APIs and all these stuff as well. So it's the same.
Yeah, that's a good point. And just to add here, so as you, especially as the company grows and more developers that get looked into the development cycle, you might also want to start thinking about compartmentalizing your environments as well. There's lots of ways to do it, but you can use AWS organizations, for instance, and create like different accounts. So you can have everyone developing in a specific environment that has no access to real data, right? Everything's mocked, everything is just development data. And so inside the organization as well, there's lots of ways for you to do that. That's really no pain at all, right? It's just a few clicks away, and you can set this all of this up, and you'll be having one of the best security teams in the world working for you. So makes things easier in that front as well.
All right, Marcelo, any thoughts before we close this question down?
I think the guys already said everything.
Okay, awesome. Okay, well, that comes to a close. This is a great, 1 hour, 20 minutes of just packed full of juicy content. Hope y'all found that super insightful and useful. And if you have any additional questions that we didn't cover, definitely message us at Serverless Guru on Twitter. And yeah, and with that, let's go ahead and do some outros here. Marcos, Marcelo, Will, do you have any things coming up that you want to shout out or kind of talk about, promote as we come to a close?
Well, I guess I can say we'll all be in the TDC in São Paulo in the upcoming days. I'm guessing it's the 21st to 24th. So if you guys are there in São Paulo in the conference, please come by our booth and we can speak more on serverless. We can talk about what your specific needs as well. We're there to help. And that's it.
And also, William, do a nice coffee. So you can all drink with us the William super coffee.
All right. Yeah, let's go. Let's come to TDC if you're in São Paulo, and will be nice to have you all there. And Ryan Combs, right?
Yes, yeah, I'll be there. I now speak a small amount of Spanish in a very isolated way. If that's I can order, I can do basic conversation sometimes. But I've been reading a little bit of Portuguese, and I recognize there are words that are being said, and I feel like I can maybe in like a one sentence I can get like one word maybe out of that. So
Like at
it's
the
gonna be
context of it, right?
it'll be interesting. So come talk to us, meet us at TDC, and with that, thank you for coming to this webinar with us about serverless mindset. And of course, we'll see you at the next one. So thanks everybody. See you next time.